First item is roll call. I know that there's Mr. Whitaker. I know Mr. Thompson is not with us today. Is that correct, Mr. Brady? He indicated he was not able to join us.
That is correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. The rest of our council is present. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to review the items and discuss the agenda for our April 6th regular council meeting. So before we begin that process, we should probably note that Mr. Thompson has requested that items 6D through 6G be removed from the consent agenda. Also, the city is continuing currently off of the consent agenda is agenda items 10A through 10D. And the city is continuing those items. Mr. Smith, do we need to do that for a date certain, or can we just have a general continuance?
Mayor and Council, we'll actually keep this on the agenda for Monday night for the continuance to vote for the continuance to occur on Monday night. I think we've actually already had some blue cards, so we'll see if those people still want to speak Monday night, and if they do, we'll leave it off consent. If they're fine with it, we'll put it on consent for a date certain continuance on the consent agenda. If they're willing to forego speaking Monday night, and they can speak obviously when it's continued to a date certain. So we'll try to reach out to them to see if we can put it back onto consent, or if they want to speak Monday night, we'll leave it off. So we'll have the motion Monday night.
Okay, sounds good.
Mayor, can I?
So that.
Just real quickly on that item. Mayor, I think we have some work to do. What we're working on is getting the development agreement agreed to by both parties. What I'm going to recommend, if council will support us in this, is that I think we've got a lot of people kind of getting involved, and we're getting a lot of different directions. I think what my recommendation is, I think we were successful with this previously when we had to work with Boeing and Southeast Mesa, is I'm just going to ask, and I think he's agreed, the city attorney to really be the point person to help work out the agreement between the two parties, and see if we can come to a reasonable terms that the city can suggest kind of as a mediator between the two parties. And then we will share that with both parties, get their input, but then that's what we would bring to the council at the future date when we reschedule this item.
Okay, so just so we're being very clear, that agenda items 10A through 10D are the Thomas and Recker zoning case, and so certainly I know there's a lot of folks who live in Red Mountain Ranch that are particularly interested in following this, and just so they know, that item is going to be continued. But if folks show up Monday wanting to talk, and by showing up, maybe this is a good time to talk about what the format of our meeting on Monday is going to be. Obviously, we're conducting these meetings remotely now. Staff has been working, and our city clerk's office has been working on how do we make sure this doesn't compromise public engagement in our meetings. And so we will be notifying people before, during, and after this meeting of how they can engage and pull a blue card electronically rather than being there physically. And so if there are neighbors or other folks that want to weigh in on this issue, there's an email address that they can go to do that. I'm not the best one at explaining this, Mr. Brady. Why don't would Mr. Smith or Dan Mickelson maybe give us a brief description of how the public is going to engage in our meeting on Monday?
Mayor, I'll give you some more information. If the public would, if they'll go to just the agenda like they normally do through Legistar, on the first page, the front page of the agenda, it gives them multiple ways in which they can be engaged. First, as far as viewing, you can view it through Channel 11 and then also through YouTube. And if you want to provide a blue card, we have a process where you can provide a blue card. There's links that we provide on that front page. And if you want to speak, we also provide you'll just fill out the blue card, you'll provide us the phone number, you'll call in, you'll be on the phone line, and then when you're asked to speak, we'll be able to pull people up telephonically, and you'll be able to speak. And so you'll be able to watch it on Channel 11, and you'll also be able to speak. So if you're interested in speaking, I'd ask you to just go to the agenda on Legistar. You'll see on the very first page all the links and different ways in which you can engage. Both you can provide written comments, and you'll be able to speak at the council meeting.
Okay, thank you. So if those folks in the community that are interested in items that are on the agenda, just refer to the front of the agenda. There's some detailed, specific instructions there as to how you can engage in the meeting via the internet. Is that a fair description?
It's also just not through the internet, it's also telephonic. So if you don't have an internet connection, if you have a telephone, you can interact.
And Mayor, it allows for individuals to both identify if they want to participate, but also, as the city attorney is mentioning, the call-in number also allows them, if they have no other device, electronic device, they can just listen in on the council meeting also. So that they have the opportunity, even if they're not interested in participating, speaking, but they will be able, if they don't have cable or internet, they can also just listen in on their phones.
Okay, so again, just so we don't disappoint folks, on Monday night, the city council chambers are going to be closed to the public. So if, in order to avoid frustration, it's important that you look at the agenda for the meeting, and on that agenda are instructions as to how you can participate over the telephone and or through the internet. And participate, you can certainly observe, and also with Channel 11, Facebook Live, there's multiple ways that it will be broadcast, but if you want to participate and provide public comment, the way to do that is identified in the front of the agenda. Fair?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. So council, like I say, at the get-go, we're taking items 6D through G off of the consent. We will be continuing item 10A through 10D. Are there other items on the agenda for Monday that you would like, that you have questions or need additional information on? All right, I'm not seeing, yes, Mr. Freeman.
Hey, good morning, Mayor and Council. I hope everybody's well and doing good. 4P as in Paul, it talks about playground equipment, new construction, and installation. Has that gone up in cost of goods and services for our parks? And I see that per job order, it's 1.5 million per order, not to exceed 2 million per year. Can I just have a little bit of briefing on that so I understand it better, please?
Sure. Mayor, Vice Mayor Freeman, this item is really just establishing the contract. We haven't identified the specific work. This is just identifying two Mesa businesses that we can call upon when we need to have repairs to our playground equipment. And so it just allows us to use what we call job order contracting to be able to call them in as needed. If we have a repair needed at a playground, then we can call on these two local groups to bring them, or two local contractors to bring them in to do repairs to our playgrounds up to the $1.5 million. So this is not we haven't actually signed a specific contract for specific work. This is just assigning the job order contract to us to two different contractors that will be available to us to use them when we need them during the year.
I guess my question was, it talks about new construction, renovation, as you talked about, repairs, and then facility upgrades. And are there plans to do that at some of the city parks? Just again, new construction. So if we have new parks installed, they would be doing that work as well.
Beth, is Beth on the line? Maybe she can answer that question.
Yes, I'm on the line. Good morning, Mayor, Councilmember Freeman. Yeah, we set the contract up with a lot of flexibility so that we can use it for whatever we need it for. This is an annual contract extended to 3 years, so it gives us a lot of time on the contract and allows us to use it for any of those services that we might need.
But to your point, Councilor Freeman, we could use it for new playgrounds, it sounds like, but right now, as you know, our playgrounds are closed. So it'll be, you know, we just have these contracts available to the Park Service so that when we need a repair or add additional equipment, we can do that quickly because we have the contracts already established. We don't have to wait weeks or months to go through a new purchasing process to get a contractor on board.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Thank you. Council, any additional questions on our Monday agenda? All right, I'm not seeing any. So moving on, the next item on our agenda for this meeting is item 2A. That is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on the impact of COVID-19 on the city's financial position, forecast, and budget modification recommendations. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mayor. We mentioned last week that we were going to come back to you with a couple of different scenarios. So that's what we are doing this morning. Again, what we're wanting to share with council is our recommendation on kind of where we see the impact of our budget and the decisions we need to make now, but also looking out into the future and recognizing there's a lot of things we don't know about our forecast. And so we're going to talk a little bit about decisions we need to make now, and then when we're going to review again when we'll get more information about the impact of the pandemic and how that will determine what our next impacts will be to our budget going further out into the future. So today we are giving you some a little more detail than last week, obviously. We don't have all the specific line item details available to you today. We have some general ideas of where we're looking at making reductions and where we've seen some additional revenues and how those will be inserted inside or calculated inside our forecast. But I'll let Candace and Brian make the presentation.
Okay, good morning, Mayor and Council. So again, you'll probably hear from us probably every Thursday morning. We'll probably be coming in here with a different budget topic or budget item for us to discuss. And so we just kind of want to give you an update as we go forward now. So we just want to kind of mention something that we kind of hit on a little bit last week, which was we had prior planning that went into this forecast. So back in the spring of 2019, a year ago, we came to you with a forecast and we set the 19-20 budget. And in that forecast, we did include an economic recession that was anticipated for 2021. The recession that we put into the planning at that point was we looked at a 12-month downturn in the economy with a 3-year recovery. So that's what was actually included in the forecast that was presented last year. That one actually anticipated in 2021 that we'd have a reduction of $5.5 million and in 21-22 of $12.8 million. So just kind of gives you the overview of what was already in the forecast as of last year. So that's a good thing for us. We also talked about with our staff for the last, with all of departments, directors and staff for the last 2 or 3 years, we've talked about, we know that this correction or recession is coming. Obviously, we couldn't have anticipated how it came to us, but we knew something was coming. The good part about that is, as we saw our sales tax increasing over the last couple of years, we have been very conservative on adding ongoing expenses and operations. Kind of looking at one-time, making use of one-time money, or making use of the money one time in order to kind of get ready for that going forward. At the same time, we also set aside money. We have $7 million that are set aside in a separate fund to be used to offset some of the decreased revenues that we're going to be experiencing over the next couple of years. During this time, we also focused on anything that was added. We've been focusing on process improvement. You've heard us talk about our data analytics and trying to use data to make the better or right decision as we go forward when we adjust operations or add staffing. So what are our new expectations going forward, though? How do we go forward from a year ago to today? So unfortunately, the recession came a little bit earlier than we had originally anticipated, and it's going to be a little bit steeper, a little bit deeper of a recession. The good part is we think the recovery we hope, is going to be faster than we originally anticipated in our spring 2019. So we have an artificial decrease in demand right now. And so the hope would be that once we get to a point where the guidelines are lifted and we're able to really kind of move about, that some of that demand will kind of come back automatically. The question is, how long will that be? The longer it is, then the longer we're going to have for a recovery period. So that's the point that we're at right now, where we're really in an uncertain period because we don't know how long it will go on before we can start our recovery. One of the things that we always look at as a city, and we have in the past when we've had to deal with declining revenues, is how fast we take action. The faster we're able to take action, the less in reductions that we'll actually have to do, which then decreases the impact to our services to our residents. We do have some good news. We like to look at good news whenever we can. So we do have a couple good news for you. So in 1920, this year, we had sales tax increases in the fall that were surpassing our original budgeted numbers. So that is actually cushioning the impact to our 1920 budget. So to give you an idea of what's going on right now, we had originally back in January or February, we're anticipating that our year-end estimate that our sales tax would come in about $11 million more than we had budgeted. Unfortunately, due to this now, we now are estimating it'll come in $6.6 million less than we budgeted. So just to give an impact of what that's doing, that's a $17.6 million swing in what we were originally estimating just a few months ago to what we're estimating now. But again, that is cushioning because, again, we're basically only $6.6 million off of our original anticipated budget. The other good news is that back a year ago, we did not know that in 2021, we would actually receive about $7.5 million in additional urban revenue sharing, which is the state income tax. That'll be coming in. It's really considered a one-time because it's a change in the tax policies that created the $7.5 million increase. We will not see that in 21, 22, and beyond. But that is giving us one-time money to be able to apply to these decreased revenues that we're seeing right now. Some of the things that we've already done, we touched a little bit on this last week. We did anticipate being able to put step pay for our employees effective on July 1st of 2020. That was included in last year's forecast, so that would be a savings that has been removed. That savings is about $3.5 million each year, and that is an ongoing savings, so we'll see that throughout the forecast. We also anticipated doing a salary market adjustment for our employees. What that is it takes a look at what the pay is around the valley to make sure that we're competitive in our recruiting activities. We anticipated being able to do that effective on July 1st, and that has also been delayed for 1 year. We'll look at it again next year to see if we want to pursue that. That's giving us some one-time savings there. And then we've also put a hold on recruiting for any vacant positions that are not in the critical or essential areas or services that are being offered to the city. And we'll be looking at those. We haven't put together how long those will be held. Again, right now those are on hold, pending further evaluation. One of the things that we've done a lot between last week and this week is working with the 3 departments that are being impacted by the closure of facilities. That's where we spent the most of our time this last week, working with those particular, that's arts and culture, it's our parks, recreation, and community services, and the community facilities, and our libraries. So those are our 3 departments that we've been working with over the last week. When we look at those, right now we ask them again to look at a scenario. What would happen if your facilities remained closed till October? What would happen if they had to be closed till January? And what we think is a worst case scenario, what would happen if they had to be closed for a whole year all the way till next April? Right now we're focusing on what would happen just to October 1st until we have some more information. But when we worked with them, we're estimating it's about $9.1 million in lost revenues that we would have by having those closures. When they put together some programs on how we could have some savings to offset that, they were able to find identify about $11.2 million in some potential savings that could offset those and also offset some of the city's lack of revenues as well. Capital projects and one-time savings, we still are working on those right now. Again, last week we mentioned that all projects were being put on hold that have not already been obligated and are underway. So each project is being evaluated for various things like the impact on the general fund, whether it creates ongoing operational obligations, whether there's grant funding or restricted funding that could be used that could allow us to go forward without impacting our general fund. Right now, staff's identified about $10 to $15 million of potential projects that we could look at for deferment. If there are projects that would result in operational expenses, deferring those would actually have realized savings of not having that operations and maintenance for a couple of years. Otherwise, it would just be deferring the cost of those projects in the future, and we would look to see whether we could afford to pursue those in the future. We are planning to come back to council next week with more of the details. We're still working through those project lists. Right now, it's just recommended of ones to review. We do not have recommended lists yet of which ones we would be recommending to council to delay and which ones to go forward. So we hope to have that for you next Thursday in our update. What we're looking at right now from council is to really, at this point, we really feel that that we'll have to keep the facilities closed that are currently closed until October 1st. We're pretty confident that we don't think we'll be able to reopen those facilities before that time. If we kind of look at that now and say we're confident we won't be able to open them and therefore we want to plan appropriately, that would then allow our staff to go back and look at those plans that those three departments have put together and start to put together an implementation plan. So what we've done right now is just identify possible savings. We haven't made any final decisions. It's just where those possible savings are. So if council agrees with staff that it does not look good to be able to open those facilities before October 1st, then we would like to go ahead and start working on an implementation plan and bring that to you next week as well of how we would actually implement those reductions in expenses, as it will affect some of the employees that we have here in the city. So next steps from here, those three departments that I mentioned will continue to work on their 9-month and their 12-month scenarios, what it would really look like if we were not able to open those facilities until January 1st, for example. And they're going to work on those the same way they worked on the first one. We'll come back and look at what that really means. We also would like to see what our March sales tax is. We won't receive that until May, until about the end of May. We'll know how we did on March sales. So is the forecast that we've put together, is it representative? How close are we? We'll only be able to see March. We won't be able to see April, which would probably be a more telling month, but at least it gives us a couple more months of data to look at, and we'll do our initial assessment. Staffing is also, so we are right now planning to come back to you in the beginning of June after we've been able to look at a little bit more sales tax dollars, spend a little more time going through the budget for next year, basically going through it line by line, department by department, to see what it is that we need to do and how we need to react. We plan on coming back to the council for beginning of June with those two different discussions. One is, does the October 1st look like a reality for those closed facilities, or is it really more of a January 1st or some other date? What's the reality that it looks like? So 2 more months will allow us to assess that a little bit better. Second discussion we'll be coming back is, what are the other operational changes we would need to make that are not associated with the closed facilities, but actually associated with decreased revenues? And we'll be coming back to council at that time with our staff recommendations of how to adjust the 2021 budget to stay within our resources. So with that, Mayor and Council, that's what we have for you as a presentation this morning. And I do think we want to look at direction from Council on if you'd like us to go back and put together the implementation plans associated with those budget reduction plans of those three departments.
So, Mayor and Council, I appreciate our departments working with budget to put these plans together. These are very difficult conversations. Nothing that anybody wants to do. We did this back in 2008, 2009, and it was very difficult back then also. The challenge we have before us is that we currently have several closed facilities that are supported by several staff members who do a great job, but today they are not able to perform their work, and we are not able to collect revenues associated with those facilities, especially if it's in the museums, the performing arts, even libraries and some of the parks programs. As we go in the aquatics programs, as we go into the summer now, we're continuing to carry the cost of those facilities. Even though they're closed, we're carrying those costs as if they were still open. And compounding that, we're not receiving any of the revenues that otherwise would help offset some of those costs. So every week, every month that we delay making decisions on aligning the our cost and our program cost, facilities cost, with the reality of the fact that we are not open and we're not collecting revenues, it's compounding a problem. It will be continue to compound a problem within the city. So as I mentioned last week, we're evaluating this on both the reality of when do we think these facilities would be able to be reopened for social gathering and having individuals in the facilities. And then once we get past that point, the real question then becomes after that is, where are we as far as resources of the city? Has the economic impact, even if the social gathering is allowed to return, whether it's October or any month after that, the question then also becomes has the economics also been recovered to a point where we can bring these facilities back open? We really feel very strong in our recommendation, and in fairness to our employees and in fairness to making tough decisions now so that those decisions we make in the future we can build on, is that we, just based on everything we're reading and everything indications are that these facilities are most likely not going to be open for programming before October 1st. We don't expect, even now, because we haven't ramped up and hiring of temporary and seasonal employees, it would be very difficult for us even to open up in July. So we're recommending to council we agree that October 1st is the earliest. What we will then do is continue to work with the departments on the specific plans to begin to reduce their costs, the costs associated with the activities essentially during the summer all the way through September, and bring back to you in more detail what those reductions would look like. And then we would implement those. It's going to take some time to implement those. This is going to impact individuals, and we want to be very fair and transparent to them. We need to start having those conversations with them this week. We need to sit down with them and talk to them about what their options are. We do offer some severance packages. We will offer severance packages to employees and continue to provide benefits for a certain period of time. But we need to make sure that we have the opportunity to have that conversation with them this coming week before we bring to you the detailed listing of those positions. Our preference is that those employees don't have to see that for the first time in a council meeting, that we've at least had an opportunity and a conversation with them. So that is our recommendation as we put in play today, or we move forward this next week with the detailed specifics for an October 1 plan. And then by the time, while that's going on, what we want to do then is come back in end of May, 1st of June. We'll then know what the impact has been in our March sales tax, and then make a decision about whether or not that decision of October 1 needs to be continued further out to January or even to a year from today. We don't want to make that decision now. But we do think that we have to have a plan in place, because if we come to you at the end of May and it looks like it's worse than we expected, then we will have to implement the next phase, whether it's a January 1 or a year from now plan to put in place. So that's the guidance that we're seeking from the council. Council is, and this is very difficult, if we continue to delay these decisions, it means we have to cut more on the back end eventually, because we're not receiving any offsetting revenues from these programs, activities, or events. We're not getting those dollars in today. And this would be March, April would have been big months that we would have collected significant fees from a lot of these venues that we are not going to receive. But we are carrying the expense. and that expense continues to go even though we don't have these facilities open. So we have a lot of labor and operating expense that we're carrying even though we're not providing these services. So again, our recommendation is to come back with an implementation plan for through September, and then in May, June timeframe, come back with more information and make a decision about whether we need to go further out in our planning to January or a year from now.
Thank you. Painful proposals. I know we've got lots to talk about here. Let's go with Jen and then David.
This discussion is so difficult. And I really warn on taking a cut any further. I hate to see more than 90 days, but even to October, is if we go beyond that, the detrimental effect of what it's doing to the impact in 1 square mile. We've worked so hard to turn around our downtown and the identity of our city. And now, if with those closures, the economic impact is well beyond our city. It's for the people, the performers, the hotels, the sales tax generated from the surrounding exponential revenues. So the impact is horrendous. It will kill the downtown area to go much beyond the summer. We worked so hard to build our innovation district, our creative economy, giving downtown and our city an identity and the growth. We've had developers who've had a lot of confidence finally after many years of work. And to go beyond our summer is going to have a detrimental impact on us as a city in our revenues beyond the expense and in the progress that we have made. I think we can sustain key essential employees in those facilities. Through the summer, I would like to see virtual classes, performances, engagement. I think we need it for the sustenance of our economy and those institutions. We need it as a society and our humanity. It is the arts that has kept us going in these difficult times when you're at home, and it's the creative mind that is keeping us moving forward and finding new ways to deal with the economy in the state that it is. I don't think that we can completely erode the arts, our convention center, and everything around it, gutting our downtown in light of saving the operational cost. I think we have to smooth out the costs throughout the city or in other ways without gutting one section, one segment of our city as well as our society. We are a creative, innovative city. We have a lot of people who are committed to turning things around. We could create a reemergence plan. That is what downtown Phoenix is doing with their arts and their local businesses. But in the state of going anything beyond the summer, you will lose the businesses, you will lose the hotel, you will lose the following, you will lose the investment of developers who have. We can't just flip a light switch and think that our economy will return in the downtown and in the arts and the innovation district just because we decided it's a good time for us as a city. The longer we extend the closure of these facilities, it'd be exponential in what the recovery will be. So if we can't flip the switch and think everybody will suddenly, their businesses will be open, and we'll have the following, we'll have the investment, and we'll have all the buzz that we have taken almost 40 years to get to. That's not going to come back. It might take 5 years to come back to where we are today. So I am very sensitive and speak for a lot of people in the arts foundations, in the businesses, and the hotels, our residents who are seeing in their classes or their employment around those facilities gone. I can't speak for how critical it is to sustain the arts, and the economy around it is detrimental for us to gut it. I'll go on and on about that, but right now, today, until we bring clarity and bring a plan forth, nothing is being booked. If you call to try to book the convention center or anything like that, I've heard that we're turning people away because we can't say. So we need to be dynamic, creative, and save what we have going on instead of just taking it as something that's, you know, that the arts are just something that you can just slice away anytime there's a downturn. It is critical for our economy to sustain it in some way and be creative to do that. So I'll leave it at that for right now.
Thank you, Jen. David.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chris, for the presentation. Unfortunately, it's quite sad for us. I was going to ask you about our employees, whether we could redirect some of our employees that are currently not having a responsibility because of the closure of the Mesa Arts Center, as well as our museums and parks and community service departments. If we could redirect them into other areas of the city, I know that Natalie's working really hard to provide services citywide to support our efforts relative to COVID. Is there any way that we could charge against the CARES Act for that to get funding for these employees so it doesn't impact the city of Mesa? That's my first question. My next question, I'm a little shocked that October 1st, it seems draconian. I understand the reason behind that. Is it possible to maybe revisit this in July and reconsider whether we would open some of these facilities earlier than October 1st? Is it possible even look in September as a possible date of reopening instead of making a hard sell decision that we have to do it 6 months or we cannot proceed any further? So those are my questions, if that's a possibility, if we can even do that.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman Luna. So yes, all those points, you'll hear about Mesa Cares here. You're going to have a presentation, and we're hoping that through Mesa Cares, as we reassign many of our employees to work on helping provide relief and assistance to Mesa businesses and residents, that maybe some of those costs will be eligible for reimbursement. We don't know that. But frankly, we're trying to find something to get a lot of our employees who are idle or underutilized right now, to give them something to do and contribute back to the Mesa community. And so that's really what that program is. Whether or not their costs will be reimbursable, we just don't know. But going back to the question about the timeline, listen, I don't have a crystal ball, but everything I see doesn't suggest that COVID will be under control until sometime in June. And the question then becomes, when will, at the national and the state level, will there be removing the restrictions on gathering? If we think that's going to happen, sooner than later, that certainly has an impact on the ability to open our doors. But beyond that, we have not been able to collect revenues from those facilities for quite some time. And so they are at deficits today. And so we're having the rest of the city's resources are having to carry the operating expense without the offsetting revenues. Listen, if the social gathering restrictions are removed sooner than June or July, that would be pretty impressive. And then beyond that, what we have to assume is the economic impact of the city is very significant, and we've got to find a way to reduce expenses. So let me back up. If those facilities are allowed to open up, and again, nobody knows, and that's why we're trying to be very careful how we commit ourselves to events and performances in the future. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons we picked the date we did is because we do have some contractual obligations that we have to make decisions fairly quickly whether or not we're going to be open or not. If we don't make decisions to close, then we will be subject to financial obligations, even if we cancel it, if we wait much later to cancel it. So we're trying to be very prudent and conservative. So again, the question is, when are we allowed to go back and be together and gathering in these types of locations? Again, I think that saying that that's going to happen during the summer maybe is a possibility, but seems pretty aggressive. And so that's why we picked the end of September. However, I would agree, and I would say that if any time during this timeline there is a therapy, there's a vaccine, there's something that says, okay, everybody can go back to normal life, we will do everything in our power to stand up these facilities, assuming we evaluate what's happening financially to the city. If we don't make these decisions now, the idea was we have facilities that are closed today. We have resources, operating expenses that are not functioning, but we're having to pay for them to stand on the sideline. We believe that if we can make those reductions now, the likelihood of bringing back classes and opening facilities will be much sooner than if we delay and wait and eat these expenses without any possible return as far as revenues right now. We are going to keep several employees, and they will be very active in providing virtual reality venues and opportunities. But frankly, the first priority we have, as I've asked the city employees, is our first priority as city employees right now is our priority is to serve our community and find out whether it's through providing virtual classes and entertainment, but also literally trying to find ways to deliver services to our community. So that's where we're at. I'm open to the idea that we certainly can evaluate this during this timeline, but we have to make a plan now and make those reductions, put those in place. And then if any time sooner than our expectation, if it looks better, we'll be glad to stand things back up. But it's both the social and health consequences as well as the financial consequences that we're dealing with.
No, Mayor, if it's okay, if it's a follow-up, I understand where you're going to. I remember in 28 when you, Chris, had to go through those massive layoffs. We cut $60 million out of a city budget, and that was a very, very painful experience for us. And I understand where you're going for. It's an intelligent way of dealing with the situation. But I'm concerned about our employees. Now, when we furlough employees, will they be given the opportunity to come back to the positions that they've left? I'm sure you've gone through that process. Maybe if you could explain a little bit more what will happen to our employees, because there's a lot of anxiety and insecurity out there with our employees, particularly those that are working in the arts and the museums and the parks and neighborhood services and those departments, community service departments. And so give me maybe an idea of what will happen to them. You know, if they are furloughed, will they be given an opportunity to come back beginning October 1st or sooner if we decide as a city that things have improved? Give me an idea what will happen.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Absolutely. Every employee that would be impacted by these reductions would be put on our list for rehire. And as soon as we are determined that we're ready to begin bringing back positions, their positions to the city, they would be first ones contacted. They wouldn't have to reapply for the job. They would be automatically considered eligible. And as long as they're wanting to come back and we're ready to open up those positions, they would return to the city. And that's how we did it the last time too. We made sure that as the economy recovered, we went back to those same employees that we had to lay off and gave them the opportunity to come back and work for the city, and many of them did. As far as, what was the other question? We do have a specific policy regarding severance and continuation of benefits for certain periods of time. Some of that, there's a base number for that, but then it's also determined, the amount of benefit you receive is also determined by your tenure with the city. So the longer you've been with the city, obviously we extend that severance out further. And that's what we need to do this week. We need to start meeting with all those employees with the possibility that are identified as possibly being eliminated and start having those conversations with them. That's the other challenge we have in implementing reductions is it doesn't happen in a flip of a switch. We don't save millions of dollars tomorrow if we give people notice, because there will be weeks and sometimes months of severance and benefits that will continue to be paid to those employees that are being separated from the city. So we don't start realizing savings and we pay out their vacation time. So sometimes we don't realize savings for months out into the future. So that's why we have to act now, because a lot of those costs will continue with us for several weeks, maybe months, before we really begin to see a difference in the reductions we make. So even though we may be making decisions today in April, the effect of the actual impact of savings may not happen until June.
Hey, I have a question, Jonathan.
Jeremy.
So, Chris, I know that I spent a significant amount of time going over the CARES Act as it pertains to my businesses. And one of the things that the federal government did is they put provisions in there that basically said as long as you keep employees the same head count and at least 75% of their pay intact, even if they weren't working, that the CARES Act basically is the federal government giving you free money that's going to be completely forgiven. It's not money you have to pay back. You can apply for forgiveness so long as you met those requirements. Now, I assume the CARES Act was written the same way to apply to municipalities, right? Because the whole purpose was to keep people employed. So I guess bringing that perspective in, has anybody gone over this CARES Act to make sure that there isn't a provision in there for municipalities that says something like, you know, you have to keep head count, you have to keep staff, and then you're automatically given, you know, X amount of dollars so long as you do that?
Mayor, Councilman Whitaker, it's a great question. I've seen those same provisions. We are trying to get clarification on, as you know, the trillions of dollars that are out there. The one sentence we have seen for municipalities says it cannot be used to make up for lost revenues. So we're trying to figure out what that means. And so certainly if there's a way that we can use, there's a way to get reimbursed for keeping a certain number of employees on the payroll, we'll look at that. But at this point, I have not seen that specific guidance, but we'll be glad to continue to research that. I know that does apply to private, smaller businesses. I don't know that it applies to large municipalities such as us. I think they are, I haven't seen that language as I've gone through what's specific to local government.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been a week, so I assume that, you know, your staff has probably dug into that deeper than I have from
yeah, we're trying. But as you know, some of that guidance is still coming out. We haven't seen all the details. So you're right. I mean, right now we haven't seen that, and there's been a lot of, obviously, cities across the country, they're asking questions. I haven't not seen that guidance yet. But right now, that's just not, there's not a lot of certainty there.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that if, you know, just if we can get some guarantees as far as, you know, maybe in the next week or so, or if maybe Scott Butler or somebody can do a little more research. I mean, like I said, I'm sure you guys have already done your homework, but if there is something in there, it would be nice to take advantage of that.
I agree.
You know, I think we're going to be judged in a couple of scenarios here. How fast we shut things down for public health reasons, and to me that's a no-brainer. Obviously, we're not going to have fully staffed and facilities when it's foolish to be assembling crowds in our community. So, but at some point, I think we need to be very aggressive in trying to get past this impending recession that is going to be the consequence of this this pandemic. So I'm on board with April, May, June. I like Mr. Brady. I don't see even the rosiest of scenarios that would suggest that it would be the responsible thing to be operating facilities for crowds of people during that period of time. But come July, if at a national level, our health officials are telling us it's okay to congregate again. I mean, I think you're going to see this council, and particularly, I can speak for myself, say, hey, I'm not okay with walking by a shuttered up library at this point, or swimming pools or facilities that can be used from a public health perspective. You know, let's find a way to be innovative and frugal and put together a skeleton crew or roll out, you know, some hours of activity in our libraries. You know, maybe instead of having the full system open, it's just the main library, and maybe it's, you know, 2 days a week, or maybe the swimming pool is open for aquatics programs that pay their own. I get that our summer aquatics program painfully just can't happen because we can't gear up all the part-time employees. But, you know, say August, if MAC and some of the other, you know, pay-to-play aquatics programs want to pay us what it costs to open that facility, and there's no public health reason not to do that, I think, you know, we need to be able to have an implementation plan that allows for innovation and allows for us to bring these programs back online as fast as possible. So I guess I'm asking Mr. Brady if we can kind of have an asterisk by our 6-month plan.
Absolutely.
And say that we'll be looking for every opportunity to have skeleton crews or limited hours, or to have a rolling recovery of these facilities.
Mayor, my commitment is if those, like you said, if things change in the end of July, 1st of August, and we have the opportunity to roll out and open up some of these facilities. We're not eliminating everyone out of these groups. There will still be a lot of staff that we're going to be carrying that, again, that are part of these closed facilities. So the idea that it gives us the ability, when we can, we will have some core staff that we can work quickly to try to open some of these facilities up. I agree, and I understand having these options available is part of the emotional and you know, psychological health of our community. We agree. So when they're available to be open, we will do everything we can to begin moving quickly. And I suspect it'll be something that will be indicated, you know, we'll be given saying, hey, it looks like in the next 2 weeks things might be able to open. That's great. We will work. We agree. We would do everything we can. I'll have Mr. Pombier go get his first aid or his life skills test so he can do a lifeguard, because he needs that kind of outlet. So we'd love to do that. So.
And then, Mayor and Council, I'd also like to, I was probably maybe remiss when we talked about these 6-month plans and implementation plans. So I want to make sure our implementation plans are not just financial. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about an implementation plan. It's actually the first thing we ask them to do is to look at their services and how do we maintain the integrity of their programs, of the cultural aspect, of the community service that they do. So that was first and foremost. How do we maintain the integrity of the programs that we have and the reputation of the programs that we have? And at the same time, how do we look for some cost savings that'll allow us to kind of get through this recovery period? So I don't want to think that just these 6, 9, and 12-month scenarios are financial only in nature. They are service first and then financial secondary. And so it's very important to us that we keep those key people and as many of those key people as possible to ensure the integrity of these programs going forward. So our implementation plan will not only be implementation of shutting things down, but also implementations of how fast can we ramp things back up, and who do we need to keep and what do we need to keep in order to make sure that we can ramp things back up when we're able to.
And just one more comment, Mayor and Council. I know that this feels like we're just focusing on these few departments, and obviously one of the reasons that it's more obvious is because we're not collecting revenues to offset their costs right now because their facilities are closed, and so they're being impacted. But certainly as we move along, and you'll see the list of projects of deferral of purchases, deferral of maintenance projects, capital projects, when you see those next week, I think you're going to see they come not just from these departments, that they're almost every department in the city will be impacted by trying to make it through these next 6 months. And so we're trying to do everything we can, not just in these particular areas to be impacted, but we are looking across the board. Now, if we determine in June that it's worse than we thought, it'll get deeper and provide even more impact across the entire city, and because there's just not a lot of capacity. Even the expenditures of these three departments are not significantly for the entire general fund. They certainly they can help, but ultimately the largest portion of our resources that go into the general fund ultimately will fall into public safety, and that's why we're trying to avoid impacting public safety right now. But as these cuts continue to go longer and deeper, ultimately we will have to begin looking at our future hiring commitments and whether or not we can do those if it continues to get worse than what we've anticipated.
Thank you. And I get the spirit of the presentation. I mean, we're planning for the worst, but I think we need to be prepared to come back as quickly as possible. And if we have, the assistant city manager taking an afternoon as a lifeguard, I think that's great. I think the department heads, the folks that are going to live through this professionally, they might be teaching a ceramics class, right? I mean, we just got to figure out a way to progressively regain that momentum as soon as possible.
Yeah, and again, as I said, our commitment, Mayor, is to bring back those employees that are in those positions today. When it's time and we can do it, they will be the first ones we call and offer that position back to them. Okay,
I know we've got more comments. Jen, I believe you had, no, I'm sorry. Let's go with Francisco, and then we'll see who else is ready to talk then.
Yeah, no, my comment was more, you were talking about it, Chris and Candice, on identifying additional cost savings. I'm not sure if there's cost savings of us not operating some of these facilities that utilities and other items are being saved as with those. So that's one question. And in my comment on, just preparing and basing it, of course, on health and ensuring that, we keep the public safety and health concerns there, but, looking at a scale, because even if we would set a October 1st deadline, I think, we will still be needing to ramp up if we couldn't, start heavy on October 1st with these items, though. So I would suggest maybe having, which if you all need certain dates, August 1st, September 1st, and October 1st, game plan and how we build and ramp up, looking at those dates. If that's kind of the direction that folks need in looking at those specific opportunities there. So yeah, that's my comments on those dates pieces. So
yeah, no, Councilman Heredia, I think that's great, and I think that's wise that as we mentioned, June is going to be an important date to see what's happened in March. And I think we would be coming back to council frequently with updates on our updated forecast of our economics and whether we see a recovery. And if we do, then can we pivot, start bringing programs back much sooner than we expected? And if it's before October 1, wonderful, we will do that. I've committed that we will find a way to bring it back in some semblance or maybe new creative and innovative ways to do it. We will do that. But I also just suggest that every time we make those points of review, it may also suggest we may have to do more. So we're trying to prepare for both. We can stand programs up. We can do that. We can be prepared to do that. But we also have to be prepared to look beyond that and say, what if it's worse than we expected? And we have to be prepared to make those decisions too. So we'll be ready every month to come to you with those kinds of decision points and decide which way we're going. We'll be glad to do that, and we'll keep the council very much in the loop as we go through the summer.
And then just another comment, Mayor, sorry. I believe from the talks on the federal level, further actions, especially around municipality and state governments, is an ongoing topic. So as far as we can be prepared to, show the potential impact that we are having as a municipality to, if further funds become available other than the CARES Act, which I think that's a conversation that folks are having. I think that's something that we also just need to be as prepared as possible to leverage those funds so that we can save many of our employees and some of these facilities and those items. So
right.
I just want to add that comment.
No, and I think it's a great comment. It's similar to what I think Councilman Whitaker brought up, and I think it's something that we're hoping there's a nuance in all this that we will discover that will say, because we close these facilities for the general public safety because of COVID, maybe that gives us eligibility to recover some of those costs. And maybe it is because we get to recover costs regarding the operations that are continuing but not being used. We just don't know that yet. But we need to have a plan in place. Again, we need to have the plan, a specific plan with noted details. And again, it takes a while for that implementation to take place. We expect that we'll have that guidance while we're making these plans. If while we're making these plans to reduce operations significantly, but the guidance comes that the money that the city of Mesa is due to receive would cover those costs while we're closing those facilities because of the pandemic, and and how much of those would be eligible expenses, that may mitigate against what we actually implement. What we're talking about now is coming up with a plan to make these decisions, and again, a lot of it is people. And I've always had this policy that, it's better to let people know ahead of time, let them understand what the possibilities are and what they can plan for, and give them all the information they need. And then if something changes between now and May, and we should have all the guidance by the end of this month, because we're supposed to start receiving dollars end of April, and it looks like we can save some of those positions because of the new guidance, absolutely we will do that. But without knowing that today, we have to make the plans that assume we're not. And if it changes, then we can do it. We won't reduce workforce without having known what all the possibilities are with the federal stimulus dollars.
Thank you. Jen, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to, I'd hate to see any closures at our facilities. For social reasons, we need to. For social distancing, to be safe, absolutely. I'm not going to argue that. But I would like to see them sustain and be back in business when those restrictions are lifted. I would really love to see the Mesa Arts Center go back to some normalcy of being able to do our kickoff in mid-September. So I'm advocating for this fall to be as normal as possible and starting back in September. Of course, we need to be nimble and dynamic in evaluating this, like you did say. I had some questions on, and I had another note here, is that the longer that we close a lot of these facilities, it also impacts our sales tax dollars. And so those sales tax dollars are what are paying for our public safety. So we don't want certain impacts in our city, but yet we know getting back into somewhat a normal operation provides more of a healthy economy. So if we can get beyond the social reasons for closures and then open back up when we're given the clearance to do business as usual, and I would advocate for September. On the budget, there was a couple of notes that we had $7 million in additional sales tax than expected, and also $7.5 million of state urban revenue sharing. Is that being brought into the $7 million that we need to cut? And we do have some reserves. Do we have we're a very conservative city, and I appreciate that, but at times that are tough, those are the why we are conservative, so that we are resilient. And will any of those items help us soften that so that we don't cut what I think are essential in our community for just budgetary reasons?
Yeah. Mayor and Councilmember Duff, all of those are coming into consideration for the forecast in total. Oh, can you not hear me? Okay. So all of those are coming into consideration. That's why we have them. We look at all of our revenues. So not only our decreased revenues on sales tax that we're seeing right now, our decreased revenues on these particular facilities that they generate, but also looking at all of those. So the $7 million that we set aside, that was always in the forecast. Last spring, it was in the forecast to be used a couple years out. We might have to use that earlier. The $7.5 million in the income tax, state income tax, that is being applied as well. So it's all kind of going together. That's why this first round is really just focusing on those facilities that are closed and how can we recoup some of those expenses, offset those revenues with some of the expenses. Councilmember Heredia mentioned the facilities themselves. So that's part of it. That's looking at decreased custodial, utilities, everything that goes along with just the fact that the facility is not open. That's going into consideration as well. So this first step really is focusing on these three departments because their facilities are closed, and what do we do about that, and how do we react to that, and what are our contingency plans? The next step that we're talking about is actually going through every department and all of the revenues and how does it all work together, really doing a new forecast. And that's what you'd see in the beginning of June. That we'll come back to you with recommendations. We'll have those numbers much earlier than that, but we'll need to then do our recommendations and planning for that. So all of that comes into consideration.
Mayor and Council, I think one of the reasons we identified those revenues and those savings is to indicate to you, because of setting aside money, set aside funds over the last 3 years, anticipating that we were in the really good times and we expected there would be a cycle down. We set aside dollars. We were conservative, as you said, but because of that, that $7 million now we'll be using it. So it could have been, if we didn't have that, it would be more impactful. We are very thankful, obviously, about the $7.5 million that's coming from the state that we were just notified about. It's a one-time, but it buys us some time. So all these factors are helping us mitigating against the impact of the economy. So what we're showing you is everything that we've tried to do right now, and that's already been, all those have been calculated into our assumptions. But even with all of those included in our assumptions and maintaining our reserves, which will be drawn down to a certain degree over the next 3 years, as you said, when we've ended the year last year at over 19% reserves, which is almost 10% above our goal. But because of that, because we have done a very good job of managing our budgets and having significant reserves, and because we've had a very good year in sales tax, at least through middle of March, and the income tax receipts we're receiving from the state that were collected 2 years ago, all of those are helping us to cushion the impact and get us to June so that we can make an evaluation about whether or not reductions beyond October need to take place, or have we done enough, and then we can start bringing programs back up. So that's what we're trying to show you, is kind of what we've calculated into helping our budget and what assumptions are now being used in our calculation for our forecast.
Thank you for that explanation. One of the concerns I have, and I'll won't state it again, but is the budget cut impacts in one geographic area, how it impacts that area and how difficult it will be in order to recover from that, and where we are in our development in that area. So I want to be sensitive to that. And also those cuts that we're speaking of impact our sales tax dollars and related jobs around that. So wherever we can even out the cuts, I think we need to do it and not have such a deep impact in one area, whether it be the arts in one geographic area, whether it be downtown, and the exponential thing of jobs and sales tax dollars in businesses in one area. There's a lot of danger for a city of our size, of 500,000 people, 133 square miles or whatever it is, that we're taking such deep cuts in basically 1 square mile. I know there's cuts other places, but there will be none that will have such dramatic economic impact than what we're looking at right now. So I advocate for being open September and make, as we roll along and look at our projections, that we start looking at other areas and other ways in order to even out the cuts and not keep on cutting deeper into this one area. Also, to address Mr. Whitaker's question about employee reimbursement, reading all the political information from National League of Cities is my understanding, and I could be wrong, and Mr. Butler would need to correct that and clarify that. My understanding is that there aren't any dollars set aside for municipalities for their employees as like there are for small businesses. That was one area that municipalities were cut out of the bill. Not to say that maybe it'll be in the next upcoming recovery bill, but I think that's something NLC was very disappointed about and advocating for on the next set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go Mr. Freeman and then Mr. Heredia and then Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been listening to all the comments, and I'm concerned as well about all the comments, and I appreciate my council mates and their thoughts. But overall, as a city and as city council members, we have the responsibility to look at how this is going to impact our city run operations. And Councilmember Duff, I appreciate your passion and wanting to maintain the integrity of those organizations. But as I look at all our respective districts throughout the city, a number of businesses, hundreds of businesses have been impacted. People are staying home, self-isolation, and the recovery is just going to be take some time. I don't think you can flip a switch and people are going to just start coming to the downtown area, and there'll be a few, but overall people are going to be cautious. But my question too is to Candace and Mr. Brady. We have budgeted till at least June 30th of this year of people, our employees being paid, correct?
So, in our existing budget today?
Yeah, our existing budget is budgeted until June 30th.
Correct.
2020.
Our fiscal year is June 30th, but that budget obviously is much different than it was 30 days ago. We're having to make adjustments to that budget now too. That's what yes, the answer is yes when we adopted the budget, but today that budget is very different. The actual, what we thought we were receiving in revenues is much different than what we budgeted. I think we think we're going to be down 6 million.
6.6 million is our current estimate for regular sales tax.
So,
it does not include these facilities.
So I guess the answer is if we continued spending the same way we anticipated from the beginning of the year, we would be dipping much further into our reserves because our resources that we had anticipated at the beginning of the year are going to be much less.
Got it. So do the statistics or analytics say that we need to move forward with this today, or can we smooth this out for an additional 2 months is my thought. I mean, we're going to get weekly and monthly updates to the virus situation, but what would so you're saying it would cost the city $6.5 million to carry these employees until June of this year?
No. That's just telling you what's happened with resources in our budget. What we don't know is the number, we don't know the impact. We're estimating impacts right now. We don't know the impacts are going to be to the March receipts until the end of May. And I think, okay. So that's why we're trying to estimate how bad that's going to be. We've never seen something like this before. So we're trying to estimate it. And that's why we're saying, let's make decisions today as far as reductions that are consistent we believe, with the restrictions that will still be in place as far as social gathering, which we'll think will be through most of the summer. And if those are lifted, then we're willing to come, obviously we'll come back to council and talk about bringing some of those facilities up. But it's difficult right now because all those facilities that are closed were also generating revenues, fees, classes, rentals, all those. Those are not happening. So those were built into the budget too. We anticipated millions of dollars of fees that would come to offset those costs. If we wait, every month we wait, we're obviously not receiving those revenues, and we're spending money on operations that are compounding the problem. And so that's why we're suggesting is we need to make a decision now so we don't have facilities and operating costs continuing to diminish the budget, which will create more difficulties, and we'll have to take more cuts and if things don't get better. This is a way that allows us the most flexibility by making the reductions now. And so when the time comes that it's time to stand them back up, because one, we've removed the social gathering, the health concerns, we'll at least be in a better position financially to do that. If we delay and our revenues and our economics are as bad as we think they are or worse, it will make it very difficult for us to open up these facilities now when the social gathering is allowed, because financially it will be very difficult for the city, because then you'll have to make choices about what other programs and the rest of the city are you willing to cut. And most now you're getting into things outside of the community social engagement. Now you're getting into services like community services, code compliance, public safety. That's where you start having to make those kinds of decisions once you get outside of these services that we're talking about today.
Thank you. That covers my questions, Mayor.
Thank you. Frankie, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
good.
thank you. Jeremy.
What percentage of these employees that we're looking at furloughing right now, what percentage of our overall employee budget does that account for?
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, that would be part of the implementation plan we'd be coming back to you with next week. So again, we just have been focusing on these three departments and what we need to do for their scenarios on ramping down and also ramping up. We haven't put it then into the perspective of the whole department or the whole city. So we'll be putting those numbers together over the next week if this is the direction that we're receiving, is to continue with implementation plans.
Okay, well then let me rephrase. How many millions of dollars are you looking at saving if you implement with these three departments right now?
So Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, that current estimate is about 11 point, it is on, what slide number is that? 5? So on slide 5, you can see that we're currently estimating a loss of revenues of about $9.1 million between all of these facilities that are closed. And the current plans that we've put together, they're estimated about $11.2 million in savings. That's a combination of costs that we would not have, let's say, for a show at the Mesa Arts Center. There's some ones that would be associated with those shows. It's a reduction in those expenses, as well as a reduction in the expenses of just keeping the facilities open, as well as personnel expenses. So you can see the 11.2 million. The first thing it's doing is covering the 9.1 in lost revenues that we're estimating, and then also then be contributing toward the overall city reduction in revenues or lost revenues that we were expecting.
So that I make sure that I understand this chart correctly, this is basically saying that the plan is to cut $11.2 million. It says reduced expenses. Is that directly payroll, or are there other expenses associated to that?
No, Mayor, Councilmember Whitaker, those are all expenses. So that would be payroll, that would be custodial, that would be utilities, that would be expenses we would have incurred because we had a show that had revenues and temporary expenses, temporary people. It would be technical people, anything associated with that. So they really kind of scrubbed through and said, first of all, what expenses would we not have just because the facility is closed outside of personnel? And then they looked at also now, okay, now that it's closed, what would be our first tier of reduction in personnel because we don't have anything for them to work on?
Okay, and that's the number that I'm looking for. Are you indicating that we don't have that number?
We'll have that
Correct,
detail.
Correct, that's part of the implementation plan. The goal of this last week was to get the dollar amount. What do they think they're looking at? They have, we have those plans from them. It was really just to get a dollar amount of what are we looking at? What is the significant expenses we think we can address over this time period and still keep the integrity of their programs? That was the goal. That gave us a dollar amount to work with. And now as we look at that, now we would start going through the implementation plan of actually identifying those positions that would be affected. How are they in the total dollar amount? The other part of this you need to understand is that when they looked at these positions, again, as Mr. Brady mentioned, if we identify a position that we are not going to go forward with and we need to lay that employee off, once we make that decision, it's not effective the next day. So there's a long process that we have to go through. So some of these won't even have savings in the next couple of months. We won't start experiencing payroll savings for probably a couple of months from now.
Yeah, okay. The other thing that I want to discuss is that it sounded like there was 2 phases to this project. The first phase was furloughing individuals who we can't actually put to work, if I understand that correctly. People that are going to be in facilities that are closed down. I think you guys called them the service industry part of the city, right? And then the second phase, I assume, means that you have to start cutting employees who aren't necessarily out of work, but from a financial perspective, we just can't afford to employ them. Am I interpreting those phases correctly?
Council Whitaker, that's correct. I mean, right now we're recognizing we have facilities that are not open, but we're carrying the cost and we've lost the revenue. So that's a compounding effect. So that's that's what we're telling you right now. We need to make those decisions today because it's going to be some time before we see those savings. Then when we come to you in June, we're going to make another assessment about where we believe our budget numbers are, where our revenues are, and we have to make a decision then whether or not we need to make additional reductions, not just necessarily in these departments, but it could be these departments and many others across the board.
Okay, so I understand now. So we're not necessarily moving forward with the second phase, but I just want to reiterate as we move forward. And I mean, look, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but 6.6 million people just filed for unemployment last week. So, I mean, this is going to be a lot deeper than I think any of us anticipate. And before we get to that second phase of laying off employees who we don't feel who are actually part of our core business, I'm going to suggest that we explore options of taking cuts at the top, cuts across the board. I think, for even from don't even exempt us, from a council perspective. I think, in order to maintain the staff that we need for a functioning city, if we need to reduce payrolls by 25%, then I'm gonna suggest we start at the top and we cut payroll by 25%, and or at least reach out to our employees and see, where people are at. But I'm willing to say that we take a personal cut because that's going to show our employees more loyalty that we're willing to take those cuts alongside of them rather than just laying people off arbitrarily. So that's just a comment I want to make before we roll into that second phase, or I don't know if you guys are planning that at this point.
So Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, those are all good points. We're not there yet. And so just to let you know what we do look at when we're looking at stepping through reductions when it comes to the budget, the reason you are correct in the first tier is just that it's these particular departments because they have closed facilities. But after that, when you're just looking at normal reductions in revenues and how do we deal with that as a city, the first thing we do is look at vacant positions before we ever look at a position that has an employee. So we're always looking to try to shield our employees as much as possible. So in the Great Recession, when we went through that and we had to cut everything back, the first thing we did was look at vacant areas. And then also, if we had to get into positions that had a filled position, those employees were reviewed and looked at for a vacancy in a department where we were going to fill in a critical or essential staff. And so we were able to move a lot of our employees from one department to another department. So maybe because there was a position over there that they were qualified for, and that was not going away. So that's the first thing we look at when we're looking at those. So we're always going to kind of step through. We also have looked at in the past, and again, I don't know if we'll need it this time or not. We won't know till we look at some more data. But during that time, we also did across-the-board pay reduction, and that was part of it. It was a 2% across the board back during that recession in order to allow us to kind of reset our base level and go forward. So all of those options will be open. All of those options will be looked at. We're not there yet. We're just dealing with these 3 departments while we gather more data, and we will come back to you with all of those various options.
Great. The next point that I want to make is that, in this presentation, we haven't talked about the anything related to the PSPRS or the ASRS forecast, right? And I'm looking at something like ASRS was 70% invested in equities, and we've seen a 30% fall off in equities over the last couple of months, which leads me to believe that our ASRS pension funding system is probably going to drop down near the 50% level where PSPRS is. So at what point are we going to start looking into that and determining what effect those future pension obligations are going to have on our budget moving forward? Because I have to assume those numbers are in the millions. Or I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know off the top of my head, but I assume those numbers are going to be in the millions.
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, you're correct that those pension plans will be affected by this because their investments were in the market, and we've seen that in the past. Now, the good part about that is it's not a one-time. For example, PSPRS actually takes those reductions and spreads them out over 7 years. So you wouldn't see the impact to the rates all in 1 year. It would be over the 7 years. But we are looking at that. Again, that is one of the, when we're looking at coming back to you in June, this is the full forecast. So that would be an update on where we are with revenues or what we are expecting for revenues, but also an update on the expenses. And that's one of the key factors we'll be looking at is what are the increased expenses because of this, including that in the forecast. And that will have to be addressed as well as part of the reductions.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that we can step that up and start analyzing that sooner than later. I don't see a need to wait until June to know what our PSPRS and our ASR obligations are going to look like. It's going to significantly impact our budget from what I can tell. So, I mean, I'm not sure what we're waiting for.
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, it's not that we're waiting. That's when we're going to bring them to you. That's when we're going to make the presentation to council. We're working on those right now. We actually have 2 parallel activities going on right now in the city. One is we need to roll up the 2021 budget so that we can adopt it. So we've got staff working on that. Simultaneously, we're working on adjustments and revisions to the expenses, to our assumptions in the forecast. So those things are going on right now. So there's no waiting. That's just when we think we'll have the actual package to bring to council.
Also, Mayor, Councilmember Whitaker, we get the actuarial updates, and unfortunately, we can't speed up PSPRS. We usually get those in December, and yes, we would love to have those actuarial sooner, but PSPRS has their standard operating procedures that they do, and the actuarials will not be updated until December.
And you can't call over there and ask them, like, hey, what do your assets look like?
Unfortunately, Mayor.
We would love to call over there and say a lot of things, but none of that seems to happen.
Again, Councilmember Whitaker, just because we don't get the official ones, we do have staff that have actually put together, we kind of do our own forecasting of where we think the rates are going to go and what the different factors are in those. And so just because, I mean, we have to wait till December to get the official ones, but that doesn't stop us from doing our projections just like we do on any projection for expense, any projection for revenues. We're lucky that we have staff with the skill sets to go in and kind of do that analysis and do that forecasting so that we're not just reliant on outside organizations.
Well, great. I just want to reiterate, I'd like to see that sooner than later. And the last thing I want to talk about in slide 6 is all of the capital projects that we currently have underway or obligated to. Where I emailed last night and requested a list. I'm looking for a list of all of the capital projects that are currently underway or obligated to. Where is that list that shows the dollar amounts obligated to each one and the annual cost to our budget?
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, when it comes to total projects that were budgeted for this year, that would be the capital improvement program document that would show you the annual costs that you were looking for. When it comes to those that are underway, there isn't a summary list sitting somewhere of projects that are underway and projects that are not underway. Those are ones that we would be running reports and pulling data in order to do that, of which ones are underway, which ones are obligated, which ones have started design, construction. All that information exists to staff for each project. It's just not something that we have as a summary report that's already written. But if you want a list of all of the projects, they're in the capital improvement program document. And then we can look at, again, next week we'll be bringing back those lists of projects into categories. These are projects that we're recommending that we continue to go forward with. These are projects that we're recommending that we defer to a future date and reassess.
Yeah, so let me be clear what I'm looking for so that there's no mistake next week. I'm looking for a simple Excel document. It'll list every single project that's currently underway or obligated. And in the next column, it'll say what the total cost of that project is. And the next column, it'll say what the annual cost to our budget is for that specific project, so that I can see a holistic picture of what our obligations look like from a capital program perspective.
So Mayor and Council, we'll try to provide that list. Right now, we're focused on trying to balance this budget and get the numbers out. If we can accommodate that request, we will try. Our recommendation at this point is we're not including any project that is currently obligated or under contract. That is not being considered because of the consequences of the fact that we have legal obligations and contracts that are already committed on projects. Those are not going to be included. We will probably include projects that may be in a design phase, and we may be suggesting that those projects be delayed or postponed for some period of time. But we are not considering projects that currently have a legal contracted obligation to. We're not including any of those in the list for next week. So our priority as far as staff resources will be putting together the capital projects that we're going to present to you to be deferred or postponed. And we will try to come up with a list of projects that are currently underway, that are obligated, but none of those are any that we'll be including on our list going forward. When I say obligated, it means contractually for construction obligation. If we have projects that have a design contract to, those may be considered for delay. We may just work on the design phase, but defer the construction phase.
Well, it's great. I'd like to see a whole list so that even if we're obligated from a construction perspective, what does it look like to break those contracts, right? Like, so is the risk of the cost versus breaking the contract worth the annual cost it's going to afford to our budget moving forward in the future years? I mean, as a council, we need to see that entire list so that we can analyze each one of these projects and know, well, what it is we're going to be spending money on.
So Mayor and Council, I guess I'd like direction from the full council on that, because that will consume a tremendous amount of resources. We're trying to get something together, turn this around by next week with the current projects that are not under construction, that don't have a construction obligation to. We'll be glad maybe to provide that at a later time, but between now and next week, we have to begin talking to employees, working with departments on this first phase plan, and we'll be glad to share with you the projects that we're recommending. If we want to get into this discussion about projects that are under construction and how we would terminate those contracts and what the penalties would be to the city, I think we'll have to get the city attorneys involved, and that's going to take a much longer process. We can't turn that around by next week.
I'm just looking for a list. It's a three-column Excel document.
Okay, at this point, let me intercede. Obviously, it's the role of council to ask questions, and all of these questions are appropriate. But it's Mr. Brady's prerogative to tell his staff what to do and what documents to prepare. I do know that it's on our agenda next week to talk about deferring capital projects. I think I look forward to that presentation. But looking forward to that presentation, I don't think, certainly speaking for myself, I'm not going to micromanage Mr. Brady to tell him what columns I want to see on a document. Hopefully, Jeremy, your questions will be answered in the presentation next week. It is time to move on to our next agenda item. This agenda item is to provide direction on the staff's presentation. And if you don't mind, I think the way I would summarize the direction that I've heard, I think, frankly, we are on the same page with staff. What I've heard is looking at a 90-day horizon. I think it is we've got a very high level. I hope some of the joking that we've done here about having our assistant manager teaching ceramics classes or being a pool lifeguard isn't misconstrued as us demonstrating any amount of disrespect for the professionalism of our staff. This is a very painful situation that we're in right here. We've got world-class programs at the Mesa Arts Center, our aquatics program, our library programs. These are all top-tier national programs, and we have highly qualified, highly trained professionals that are suffering a real professional catastrophe. And so we need to be sensitive to our employees, and I want them to know that this downturn and these cuts are going to be as short as possible, and we're going to return to business as usual as quickly as possible. And so I think if we, rather than take the approach that we're just going to shutter the city for 6 months, I think the attitude needs to be we're going to have a 90-day horizon where we're going to be evaluating each program, each facility individually. And it might not be a one-size-fits-all closure. It might be that the pools can come back faster than the libraries, can come back faster than the arts programs. I mean, these are all unique, specific programs that probably just can't be treated with a one-size-fits-all approach. So what I'm hearing, and council, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we do endorse staff's recommendation that for public health purposes, it's not realistic to think that we're going to be able to open these programs for the next 90 days, but that we do evaluate in June how quickly these programs can be brought back online. If the public health situation permits, we want to be aggressive in bringing these programs back as soon as possible. And frankly, that's not, I think, inconsistent with what I heard staff's recommendations to be. Council, is that a fair assessment? Okay. Thank you. I know a lot of hard work has gone into this, and these are difficult decisions, but I just want to reassure both the public that will be the customers for these programs and the professionals that are involved in providing these services that we take this very seriously, and it is it's our top priority to have these programs back online as soon as possible. All right, the next item on our agenda is item 2B. That's to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on Mesa Cares, a citywide initiative to assess community needs resulting from COVID-19 through outreach efforts and by providing needed support and resources. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mayor. I mentioned this program, introduced this program last week, I believe. Or no, sorry, that was Tuesday. Seems like it's been a week ago. Sorry, Tuesday. And as we've already discussed, the largest stimulus package in our country's history has been approved by the federal government. It's known as CARES. And so it is intended to provide relief and assistance to those who have been impacted by COVID. As a city, with all our resources within our organization, we have also recognized that we have a significant responsibility to also be part of distributing and assisting our community as those funds become available, and if the many different programs that are out there are becoming available for relief. We're trying to position our staff in the best position to help out. and working through many of these programs, a lot of which we're just finding out about as we talked about today. So we're calling this effort Mesa Cares. And so I've asked my staff to begin putting together a program. And so Carrie is here today to present that to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mayor and Council. We've been talking this morning about the CARES acronym, so I'll let the audience know what that stands for, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and we have been calling it the CARES Act. As Chris mentioned, we have a money that will be coming from the federal government to the city of Mesa, and that knowing that these funds could possibly come within the next 30 days, staff would like to share with you today a citywide response to the pandemic, what we're calling Mesa Cares, which will organize our best efforts to extend relief and assistance to individuals and businesses in Mesa. So I'm going to talk today about 3 components of our Mesa Cares program: the Community Needs Assessment, the Mesa Specific Resource and Call Center, and then funding, tracking, and documentation. The first part of our program is actually conducting a needs assessment. We are going to be personally, through phone calls, reaching out to the community to gain an understanding of what their key issues, concerns, and needs are. And staff will be taking this feedback into account and creating categories of needs assistance. And then based on these categories, we will be working with external partners, as well as perhaps the city might be delivering some of these programs in these particular categories. Starting this afternoon, we are going to be actually training over 100 employees, and some will be bilingual as well, to reach out to make personal phone calls next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to nonprofits, faith-based communities, businesses, industry associations, veterans associations, schools, airports, user groups, etc. So we'll be conducting that on those 3 days starting on April 6th. The East Valley Chambers of Commerce have already started with some business surveys they've been doing over the last couple of weeks. Our City of Mesa Economic Development Office has been conducting surveys as well. So we're going to be getting a lot of information from the business community, as well as those personal phone calls we'll be making next week to individuals and other associations. We have, over the last couple of days, received a lot of those contacts from our departments that we'll be outreaching to. But should you have some specific agencies you want to make sure that we contact, please, through your council assistants or directly email me, and we'll make sure that they are, we have a lot on our list already, but we will double check to make sure if there's anything in particular that is definitely on our list. The second component is a community resource and call center that is specifically geared towards Mesa residents and businesses. This is actually going to be hosted by our Mesa librarians. We are ready on Monday to stand up a 7-day-a-week call center from 8 to 5 via the telephone, and we will have bilingual individuals as well assisting. The goal of the call center is to be a reliable resource to our individuals, Mesa residents and businesses, to ensure that if there are specific services that they might need, we want to make sure that we are guiding those individuals to programs we currently have in place. But as we get care funds, we're going to be developing a lot of new programs. So our librarians are going to be the knowledge center to make sure that we connect those residents to those particular services. The call center number is going to be 480-644-CARE. Special shout out to our Energy Resources Director, Frank McCrae. This has been, CARE is 2273. It's been his office phone number for numerous years, and he has graciously donated his office line so that we can have this specific CARE call number. We're also going to be creating a specific website. It will be on our mesaaz.gov/Mesa Cares. It will specifically be geared towards potential eligible programs for Mesa residents and businesses. And then we're also going to be utilizing, we've got an awesome communications team, and so we'll make sure that we develop a communication strategy, which will be very quickly, so that we can start getting out this information starting tomorrow, because we're planning on activating this call center and this website on Monday. Certainly we will, as programs get developed, we will be adding more information to these websites, but we want to start this Mesa Care programs immediately. And then the third component, we're actually going to be assigning staff to work on our funding, tracking, and documentation team. We know that we're certainly learning what the requirements are of the CARES funding, but there's going to be a lot of documentation. As we know, with many federal programs, we got to make sure that we have the proper documentation to make sure they meet federal requirements, to ensure that we get reimbursed for those funds. So there's going to be a team of employees that are going to be focusing on that as well. So it's taken a village over the last 48 hours of staff to develop this program, and it certainly will evolve as we go, but Team Mesa is ready to assist. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions or any feedback that you have as we move forward in developing this program and standing up this program come Monday. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Okay, just quickly, thank you, Carrie and Natalie and everyone that's worked on this. This is kind of, they always regret my brainstorming ideas, but they've learned to adapt very quickly and to run with it. This has happened literally overnight. Mayor and Council, we want this to be a Mesa-specific resource for our community. One, to be a way to take calls and to listen to people and see if we can find resources to connect them to. We want this to be the location where we can work with our nonprofits, our faith-based organizations, and any community group to begin identifying needs. Our intent is, as we identify needs, to come back quickly to Council and begin creating the categories where we think the greatest needs are, so we can then begin developing the programs and processes and figuring out how we use our partners in the community and figuring out ways and coming up with ways to distribute the dollars in a manner that is most efficient, that we can get it out to those who are most in need, but at the same time doing it in a way that allows us to meet the fiduciary responsibilities that the federal government will require of us, because they will come back and audit us, and we want to make sure we're not then having to repay the federal government for dollars that we shouldn't have spent. But we believe if we're starting now, and we're able to use a lot of our employees that are not currently able to go to their workplace. We're able to do all this virtual training or this distance training and get them online and start utilizing them to serve our community. So we just wanted to share this with the council and obviously ask your assistance in helping us to get the word out and share this with the community as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Council, questions? Jen.
Yes, well, thank you for putting this program together. It's tremendous, and it is so needed. I think it will really help everybody, all our businesses and our residents. So thank you to all the staff and that have put this together, and all the staff that will work on this. It's greatly appreciated. One suggestion is that somehow could we track or document what the questions or needs are in some way that doesn't create a lot of headaches or overhead in doing it, so that we can be more aware of where the needs are, where we can focus some communication, where we can, what is going on in our community where they're not finding the resource or have concern, so that we know where to especially as we are starting to shape some of our CDGB dollars and ESG dollars and stuff like that. Or maybe it's just a matter of our communication that we're missing the boat on, that a lot of people have a certain question, and how can we push out that information to be a better of assistance? Because if one person has a question or concern or need, certainly a lot of others do. And so it's exponential.
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, part of these personal phone calls that we're making, as well as the surveys that we're getting back, that I'm noticing from the chamber and also from economic development. But part of that is actually developing themes. So the questions that we are going to be asking are their challenges, their pain points that they're having, because we're gonna come back to you. So we're gathering all this information next week, and we're gonna develop themes, categories of those particular areas, and then that will help us in developing the programs. We're gonna bring those themes to you on Tuesday the 14th at your study session then. And so we're gonna share with you this cross-section of feedback that we've been getting over the past week, and including the surveys as well. So you can see the themes. So when that CARES money comes to the city, then our goal is to develop programs, whether internally or with our partners, external partners, to address those particular themes or categories, because those are going to be the greatest needs.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Let me just say, I think this is exactly what we ought to be doing. I mean, the current situation that we're in has exposed some huge needs in our community that are specific to what we're going through right now. And if we are able to be nimble and innovative and flexible and shift resources from the way, what normal was 3 weeks ago to what normal is now, that's critically important, in how we respond to this. So thank you, Carrie and Chris, for setting this up. We've also, and I know at this point we're doing outreach, we're doing evaluations of what the needs of the community are. We need to work really hard to get the word out to everyone and to have clear eyes so that we can see what the needs are, so that we can shift city resources to address those things. An example of this, a couple of weeks ago, and I've told this story a few times, as I was sitting at the United Food Bank event, seeing all of these elderly folks standing in line, many of them with obvious medical conditions. It just seemed obvious to me that something was broken there, and that we needed to shift some community resources to figuring out how to support that at-risk population. So that they can stay home and still have access to the things that they need. So I appreciated the way that we're now using library staff and people that were doing something different a week ago to shift over to that pressing need in our community. So kudos for seeing the obvious and helping us to direct resources where they need to be put at this time.
Thank you, Mayor. And Natalie's on the line. She's kind of been my partner over the last 48 hours, and she's really been instrumental in working with her library staff to, on that side, to create that call center with Heather Wolf.
And Mayor, can I just take a moment right now to, it's a difficult time in the library department. They lost one of their librarians just the other day. The individual was homesick. And it got significant, and thought they were getting better, and then we didn't hear from them, and they've lost a very dear companion, and yet through all of that, they pulled this together. So we just want to express our sympathies to the library staff and to the family of our employee who passed. Again, I don't know that we're very absolutely know whether it was related to the virus, but the symptoms seem to be very consistent. But again, we just want to say we're very appreciative of all our employees, especially in the library department, for continuing to show up and assist us during these difficult times.
Thank you. Yes, our condolences go out to the library staff and to the family of our employee. Frankie, I know you had your hand up, and then Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, same condolences to the library staff there. But my question on On the call center, Carrie, I'm assuming there would be like an intake process so that, you know, calls that are coming in, there's reports being developed maybe on an ongoing basis that kind of give us some clarity on where people might need some support on, or, you know, allow us to be then, you know, figure out if we need to do webinars or other things on you know, supporting, be that small businesses or residents, or, you know, who a nonprofit community. So is that something that is possible with the potential calls that or inputs that are coming into the city through this program?
Mayor, Councilmember Heredia, yes. Our plan is similar to the personal contacts that will be conducted next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, because it's a series of questions addressing those needs. The library staff will also be doing that as well with the callers, and so to make sure we're continuing to be on track with the services that we're providing, or do we may need to make a shift. It might be after a couple of months or so, we're addressing one thing and all of a sudden something else is popping up. So we want to make sure to continue to take that feedback. So if we have to shift towards looking at implementing perhaps something different or modifying a program. So yes, that will continue to happen as well.
Thank you, Frankie. Mr. Freeman.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Kudos to staff for thinking outside the box and repurposing or redirecting employees. And I think this is key to reaching out to our community by having this care line. I'm all in. I think that's really good because there will be members of our community that will need this help and support. And I think what a great resource are librarians. They're so knowledgeable, and they can come in and the bilingual aspect of it as well. And then, as Carrie stated, I know that this will be ongoing, that you'll have to reevaluate the program and also, you know, just change things up as we move along, because this is new territory for us. So thank you, Mayor and Carrie and Chris, for brainstorming and having move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Mr. Luna.
I also wanted to voice my appreciation for Carrie and her staff, as well as Natalie. We talked about this yesterday when we had a conversation about how we begin to triage some of the concerns of our community. This is a great location for us to do that. So I appreciate Heather Wolf and her staff for doing that. But I also appreciate having bilingual staff. There's a lot of Spanish-speaking members of our community that need certainly some resources. This is an avenue that they can call and get information. And I appreciate you doing that to ensure that we can also serve them and their needs as well. So best of luck to you. If there's anything that we can do, I can do to assist, I'm more than happy to as well.
Thank you. And Mayor and Councilmember Luna, you know, we will continue to use Mesa Espanol like we always have. The website, as many of you know, will continue to use our city's website that's embedded Google Translate in it. So not only will there be Spanish translation, but there could be, there's a number of other languages that we have in this community that the page will be translated into, so that they are fully aware of those services as well.
Thank you. You know, Carrie, this is a great idea, but it seems like its success is really dependent on a lot of community engagement, a lot of us, like I said earlier, kind of seeing the obvious, seeing what needs are being exposed in the community. Can you talk a little bit about how are we going to make sure that that we're seeing that and hearing that? What kind of outreach are we doing to engage not just the nonprofits, but everybody in the community, so we know how we need to adjust that to be of use at this time?
Mayor, yesterday, actually over the last 2 days, we have asked all of our departments to provide contacts that in the police department, it was faith-based communities, it was a number of different organizations and parks, it was their user groups from their coaches, the leagues, the soccer leagues, a number of different things. We have different business organizations. Community Services has all of our nonprofits that we have here in the community. Development Services, we talked about outreaching to the Home Builders Association. So every department has key groups that they work with on a regular basis. So we just said, give us all of them. We have over 100 people that we're gonna have on calls later this afternoon from our parks, arts, transportation. All these departments volunteered many of their staff to blanket all of those contacts that we're getting. So we're looking at doing something on Nextdoor to get some individual feedback because we do have a lot of more organizations. I've got the fire department that has already been outreaching to some of their regular individual customers that they work with on a regular basis. So all of our departments have these connections with these groups, and that's the plan, is just to blanket various groups from throughout the city in different categories.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully the media and through our own social media will help us get the word out that we're trying to be nimble and looking for what the community's needs are so that we can be responsive. So thank you. Council, any additional questions on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, the next item on our agenda is item 3, current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. Anything you'd like to share with this council? Yes, Jen.
I'd like to just say happy World Autism Day. Today is Autism Day worldwide, and to recognize the efforts that we're doing in our own community among the businesses and tourism and everything. I know everything's kind of at a standstill, but want to recognize that segment of our society and that we celebrate those who are autistic and the families around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we look forward to inviting folks back to Mesa as soon as possible, and particularly from the autism community. So thank you for noting that. Council, other events or items you'd like to share with us at this point? I will just remind folks that we are at 1:30 this afternoon. We're doing a small business summit on our mesaz.gov/small business summit. As we've talked about today, there's a lot of federal assistance that's coming online, SBA loans and incentive packages from the federal government. So Congressman Stanton will be participating in that meeting to provide summaries of some of the federal resources that are available to Mesa businesses. We'll also be talking about the stay-at-home order and how that impacts businesses, and then just responding to questions from the business community. So I hope that we have a good turnout. We'll also obviously be rebroadcasting that on Facebook and through social media. So hopefully that will be an opportunity for us to answer some of the questions and maybe respond to some of the anxiety that's out there in our business community. If there's nothing else, yes, Jen.
I just want to bring up one more thing, is that our teddy bear hunts. So throughout the neighborhoods, residents are putting teddy bears in their windows or on their front porch. And a lot of our community is walking so much more than ever before. But it's a fun thing to be able to count the teddy bears or look for the teddy bears. And just shows a lot of caring and warmth at a time that we're socially distant. So I encourage everybody to put out a teddy bear in front of your house, and let's have fun with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, just talking about events, obviously tomorrow is another Friday morning. We'll have a huge turnout at the Mesa Convention Center for the United Food Bank food distribution event from 7 to noon. We saw last week over 2,000 folks came by to pick up from the low and moderate income category to come and pick up food. So if you, I know that was well staffed last week in terms of volunteers, but still really a major event in our community we all need to be mindful of. Frankie, do you mind if I call on you to give us a quick comment on the census? Yesterday was Census Day, and maybe when folks are home or not and looking at their screens, is this not a good opportunity for us to remind people to log on to the census?
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, yesterday, April 1st, Census Day. It's not the only day you can fill out the census. We have some time now that the Census Bureau expanded their timeline here, but yesterday was a big day nationally that folks could, if you have about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your family size, log on to the census website to fill out your form. And if you have time today or in the next couple of days, I would do that. Bring so much resources for the next decade. It affects our ability to create infrastructure for the next year, representation, right? So, folks, if you're all listening, sign up. Fill out your census form. You should have received by now a couple mailers from the Census Bureau with some information how to do that. And so thank you everybody that have already submitted their information, which is around 40% of Mesa, which we're trickling up, but we can do a lot better for sure. And so if you all can help, if you already filled it out, if y'all can spread the word, text your brothers and sisters, your nanas and tias about the census and ensure that they get counted as well.
Okay, thank you. Council, anything else you'd like to share with us under this agenda item? All right, seeing none, Mr. Brady, let us know. We've got a little bit of a different schedule now. Obviously, we're meeting Tuesday afternoons, Thursday mornings, first and third Monday evenings.
So Mayor,
what's our schedule look like?
Monday, you will be back for the council meeting. We'll have a brief study session. I think we're scheduled for that check your calendar. I think it'll be like 5:30. And then the council meeting, we'll go through the agenda one more time. And then we don't have any other presentations, just reviewing the agenda before the city council meeting will start at 5:45. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Smith and I have talked about whether or not we need to do a roll call vote to adjourn a meeting, and on advice of council, I've been told we don't need to do that. We do just need someone to make that motion, and then we can do a voice vote. Thank you. Mr. Freeman's made that motion. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.
Goodbye.